So today we're going to start out by talking about biology. We're going to start talking about the biology or the physiology of psychology, and what we would generally refer to as neurology, neuroscience, neuropsychology. You could throw psychiatry in there for some of this as well too. So we're going to start in a really basic place and then try to work our way up to thinking about maybe some pretty large concepts. We'll see how much of this we can get through today. This will probably be a full week or two of lectures. But first, let's just start at the beginning. What have I kind of drawn here?
A neuron.
Neuron, good. So, the neuron is just the most basic cell of the body. It's the most basic cell of the body. The most basic part of the nervous system. That is to say, these are just the cells. This is just a single cell, usually, though sometimes they synchronize and cooperate in some way that makes it look like one cell when it's actually several. We may talk about that, but in general here, this is just one cell, and this is really what makes up your entire nervous system. It's what makes up your entire brain. That is to say, your entire nervous system, your entire brain is just a collection of these strung from end to end and clustered together in dense places such as, again, your brain and then other kind of nervous system functions in your body. God, I'm having a hard time with words today. So the first part of understanding this neuron is really to just think about how it works, what it does. First of all, it flows in this direction. So any signal that comes in through the neuron and is passed through the neuron is going to start at this end, and it's going to move through to this end. This first part of the neuron, these branches, if you will, these are called dendrites. This central piece that's connected to the dendrites is called the soma, or just the cell body. That's where you would find the nucleus of the cell, right? So if you're used to seeing a regular cell and you see that kind of big kind of brain piece, or the center of the cell called the nucleus, well, that's going to reside here in this front part of the neuron. This long shaft here is known as the axon. And then here, these branches at the end are often called terminal buttons. Sometimes terminal branches. So the way this neuron works, right? Its real function, and here I'm just going to draw a really basic one. Right here. I'll put another one right here. Is that this preceding neuron? So this neuron here wants to send a message to this neuron, this next one that we have enlarged. The way it does that is by firing these little chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. neurotransmitters. So you've probably heard of some neurotransmitters. These are things like serotonin, these are things like dopamine. There's even a form of a neurotransmitter that's basically adrenaline. All these different types of things that you may have connected to, for instance, some type of psychopharmaceutical, some type of drug that you might take for depression or anxiety or some other type of mental illness, ADHD, these types of things. And so this is basically what that is, right? When you're taking one of those, something that's producing this neurotransmitter, at least what you're really doing is trying to relay some message to the rest of your nervous system, probably your brain. So that's kind of where that medication jumps in, is it's just gonna put that message in route, right? It's just gonna put it right on the street, rather than even necessarily making somebody else send a message. It's just gonna say, hey, more of that thing. So when these neurotransmitters get fired by this previous neuron, they're fired into what we call this space here, this space between the neurons. Now, of course, this space is microscopic. The neurons themselves are microscopic, but you should know that the neurons do not touch each other. They never touch each other. At least they're not supposed to. They may happen to, but they're not touching each other for connection. There's always this little space between the neurons, and you've probably heard this word before, but you're gonna need to reprogram your brain in terms of what it means. This space between the neurons is called the synapse. Now somehow that came to mean in kind of popular language, something about electric charge or electricity. I'm not sure where that came from. If you happen to know or look it up, that's a good thought paper. But really what it is, in terms of neurology, is just the space between the neurons. It's just the space that exists between two or more neurons. We call that the synapse. So the neurotransmitters are fired into the synapse, okay? They're released into the synapse, and then they'll be picked up by the dendrites of this next neuron. So they get fired into the synapse, and then if they make it across the synapse, get where they're going, then they're gonna come into contact with the dendrites of this neuron. And then, if this signal is strong enough, and we'll talk about that here in a second, if this signal is strong enough, well then, we're gonna get a firing of this neuron. So the neuron's gonna activate, boom. We call this firing an action potential. Call this firing the action potential. So the action potential is just when the neuron cascade fires within itself, boom, 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 trying to get to the end of itself. And once that signal, once that action potential reaches the end of the neuron, it of course will fire its own neurotransmitters, and we will start this process over again until the message gets where it's going. Does this make sense? I know that's a lot, there's a lot of words on the board, but ask me questions if you have. All right, very good. Bunch of future doctors in the room. Appreciate your studiousness. So raise your hand. I probably should have done that, but raise your hand if you shoot guns. Okay, a couple of y'all. So let's say I've got this gun, and I don't know, I want to shoot it. Maybe I want to shoot it, I don't know, but I'm holding it. And so I take the gun, and I pull the trigger. What's gonna happen? It's cocked, it's loaded, it's ready to go. This is not a trick question.
Chain of events that leads to the projectile leaving the barrel.
Okay, you really deconstructed it for us. You might also say what?
It shoots.
The gun shoots, right? The gun fires. That's all I need. So I got this gun and I pull the trigger and it fires. But what would happen if I had that same gun and I pulled the trigger really slowly?
Same thing.
What do you mean?
Once
Takes a little longer.
the trigger pull is completed, it's the same thing.
Okay, so when the trigger pull's completed, it's the same thing, and it might take a little longer, but if I pull it slow, can I get the bullet to come out slower? Like I don't want to like kill anybody, I just want to tap them on the shoulder with this bullet. So if I pull it really, really slowly, is that a good way to make that happen? Okay, well what about this? What if I take the same gun and I want it to go way farther than it should go? We're playing sniper rifle shoot the cans, I don't know. But we only have handguns, and so this time I'm gonna stand really far away, and like I said, sniper rifle shoot the cans, and I'm making this up, and I pull the trigger as fast as I can, and can I get that bullet to go farther? Can I get it to go faster than if I just pull it slowly? No, that is not how guns work. Okay, thank you for bearing with my Columbo example. You won't get that reference, look it up. But the same thing that's true of that gun is true of the neuron and its action potential. That is to say, the action potential, like the gun, either fires or it doesn't fire. It can't fire slow, it can't fire fast, it can't fire more, it can't fire less. It fires or it doesn't fire, right? So the idea that maybe we move slower because our neurons are firing slower, or we think slower because our neurons are firing slower, isn't the case. They always fire at the same firing or not firing rate, right? They don't fire more, they don't fire less, they just fire. Does this make sense? So again, just this idea of the action potential is it's what we call all or none. We call that the all or none principle. The neuron fires or it doesn't fire. Can't half fire, it can't fire slow, it can't fire fast. All or none. The tricky thing, though, about these neurons, I'm gonna erase some labels here. The tricky thing about these neurons, though, is they're kind of finicky. Like they're not going to just always fire. That is to say, they're not going to fire at just any given signal. It's not enough for the neuron just to get some stray neurotransmitter and it goes, uh-oh, here we go. That's important. No. They have a certain threshold. I gotta look up the word. Some kind of threshold. So it's just a signal threshold. That is to say, if the neuron wants to fire, or if the body or whatever part of your body wants the neuron to fire, it's got to reach a certain, again, threshold before this neuron will even pay it any attention. So just for example's sake, this is not true to any real life calculation. This neuron needs 5 neurotransmitters to fire. If it doesn't get 5, it's not going to fire. All or none. 4.5, none. 5, all. Right? So this neuron needs 5 neurotransmitters to fire. here's the preceding neuron. When it fires 3 neurotransmitters. Boom. What's gonna happen? It's not gonna fire, right? Because what? Because it's not enough, right? All or none. And here we don't have enough, so none. So this neuron gets those 3 neurotransmitters and it says, yeah, that's cool. And it doesn't do anything about it. What could happen in this study? Or another one that you might imagine. What could happen for this neuron to get this neuron to fire? Yes, sir.
Would another neuron have to come into play?
What do you mean?
Like, I don't know if that's how that works, but if another neuron were to shoot 2.
Okay, so you're saying if there was like another neuron here, and maybe it shoots 2 neurotransmitters, that might be enough.
Yeah, I mean, it already stored the 3, right? It just didn't do anything.
Sure?
Yeah.
Okay, so very good. So here is one way, right? The example I sometimes come to in class is, imagine, what's your name? The very corner? Say again? Paige. Imagine Paige, looks up and out that window at the back of the room, and she whispers to, what's your name in the pink? Katie. She whispers to Katie, "There's a lion outside." Katie, what are you gonna do? She's like, "Hey, there's a lion outside." She's not gonna believe. She needs 5 neurotransmitters. Okay. But what if, and what's your name in the black? Nikita. What if Nikita also looks outside, and at the same time, that, oh God. Katie, I'm gonna be really bad with names. At the same time, they both go, there's a lion outside. Now what do you think?
You gotta look out the window.
That would maybe activate something, right? And so this is this idea, and what I'm describing and what you've named here is what we call, let's write it here, spatial summation. What does spatial mean? What does spatial refer to? Just refers to space, like area, right? So what does summation refer to? Let me help you. What do you think? You got something?
Adding up.
There you go. So this word just means adding up over space. Right, so this idea of temporal summation is just getting at that if we add up over space, really we're looking at the space of the neurons, right? They're in different areas. If we add up over that space, over that area, the neurotransmitters that are being sent, well, then we have enough to get this neuron to fire its action potential. Okay? So one way that if the preceding neuron isn't sending a strong enough signal to get one of the next neurons to fire, one way that can still be accomplished is if several of the other neurons in the area are also sending that message. It's akin to somebody telling you something that's a little bit weird and you disregarding it, right? I don't know, this person says crazy things all the time, versus 5 people telling you that at the same time. Oh, okay, well maybe there's a line outside. You've generated enough stimulus for the person to take interest, and in this case, for this neuron to fire. What else could happen? Let's say Nakia is not there, and Katie still sees the lion, and she tells, one more time,
Her name is Paige. My name is
Paige, and you're Katie. Paige sees the lion outside, and she tells Katie. Katie's like, whatever, there's no lions here. What else could happen? The key is not here anymore. It's just Paige and Katie. Yeah.
She actually like starts freaking out or something instead of just saying it, and then maybe it'll make her believe it more, like she's not just pulling a prank or something.
Okay, so what would her freaking out look like?
Getting up and running out the door, I don't know.
Okay. So that's one way. I don't know if the neurons can get up and run away. What else might she do? She's handcuffed to the seat. Yeah. She tells her again. And then maybe again. Right? Hey Katie, there's a line outside. Shh, I'm listening. No, seriously. Katie, there's a line outside. Are you kidding? Girl? Right? And at this point, if the neuron just keeps sending the message over and over again, right? In the same way that it's kind of stored, it doesn't hold this for a long time, but for a few moments it will store that, right? I got something, anything else? No? Okay. Right? But if it keeps sending it, oh, okay, this is happening, right? And so over time, the neuron gets enough information. It's a strong enough signal, and again, we'll make it fire its action potential. This type of summation is called a temporal summation. Temporal just referring to time here. And so here we have a adding up over time. Okay. Any questions about this? Ready? So the nervous system broadly can begin to be broken down into several, we still call them systems, if I can spell it. But it can begin to be broken down into, again, we do call them systems. I don't like this, and in a moment I'll give you a different way to think of one of these system sets in particular, but we do call them systems. And so the nervous system broadly can be broken up immediately into two parts. Anybody familiar with this? Nope. These are the central and, excuse me for not spelling it, and the peripheral nervous systems. That is to say, the CNS and the P and S. Central and peripheral nervous system. I would write it out, but I don't even trust that I spelled it right in my notes. So just Google that. The central nervous system is really just your brain and your spinal cord. When we say central nervous system, we're really just referring to your brain and your spinal cord, right? Kind of command center. When we talk about the peripheral nervous system, we mean everything else. Every other nerve in your body. That's not your brain and your spinal cord. So when we talk about the peripheral nervous system, we're talking about all of the other nerves that flow throughout your body. This is not going to be a very true to life. So the peripheral nervous system can again be broken up into two systems. This is called the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is basically the part of your nervous system that you have conscious control over. It's basically the part of your nervous system. If you say, I want to lift my arm up, if you say, I want to scratch my head, if you say, I want to talk or be quiet, right? These are your peripheral, these are your somatic nerve responses, right? These are you deciding that you want to make some action or do something. So of course, the autonomic nervous system is going to refer to or be related to those more automatic aspects of your nervous system. What types of things fit into this automatic aspect of a nervous system? What type of things does your body, does your nervous system do automatically? What can you think of? Yes, sir?
Breathing.
Okay, so breathing, good. What else? Yep.
Pain.
Pain, okay. Interesting. Okay. Yep. That's a sensory thing, but of course those things are related, so that's interesting. Yep. Say again? Blinking. Okay, good. What else? This is the best one so far. Really autonomic. Yeah.
Your digestive system.
Digestion, good. What else? Yes, ma'am.
Your heartbeat.
Your heartbeat, very good. Okay, a couple more. How about this?
Perspiration.
Here we go, sweating. I would stop if I could. One more. Sexual, arousal. And, well, that says physiological arousal. So arousal, broadly, that's mostly, right, gonna also connect to things like maybe pain too, right? Your pain tolerance tends to go down when you're physiologically aroused. I don't know what's gonna happen to your blinking, maybe you blink more. But certainly your digestion changes, your heart rate changes, your breathing changes. All of these things are related to the autonomic nervous system, right? These are things that your body does by itself, usually maybe responding to the external situations or sometimes the internal situations, but they create some usually broad change in your state, right? That is to say, the autonomic nervous system actually activates two other nervous systems. Now here's where I think the idea of a system begins to be a little bit confusing. It does make sense because they really are just pathways, but sometimes it might be helpful for you to think about these as modes. The autonomic nervous system can trigger two different modes in your body. Anybody got a sense of these, even if you don't know the name? These are basically, well, here's the name, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Sympathetic and the parasympathetic. These are basically just different physiological arousal states, where the sympathetic state is the aroused state, is the physiologically aroused state, whereas the parasympathetic is the physiologically relaxed state. So your body can switch you between these two modes, between being physiologically aroused and then being physiologically relaxed. what do you think comes with this? What types of things go with physiological arousal or physiological de-arousal or relaxation? You can choose from this list. Yes, sir.
Could like speed up or slow down your heart rate.
Okay, which one?
Sympathetic would speed up and parasympathetic would slow down.
Very good. So in the sympathetic, you're gonna get an increase in your heart rate. In the parasympathetic, you're gonna get a decrease in your heart rate. Yes, sir?
I was gonna say, it could cause anxiety, so I guess kind of going on the sympathetic side of things.
Okay, so anxiety would be where, you say?
On the sympathetic side, the aroused.
Very good. This is probably when you're likely to experience anxiety. Anxiety is kind of a negative way of thinking about, bad negative, but I think more negative than we could. Of what? What's this basically? Why do you get anxious in the first place? Why the hell is that?
Well, I mean, there's quite a few factors, I guess, or there.
Very base. Who can help him? Yeah.
Fear.
Say again?
Fear.
And that activates what? F or fight or flight is what I'm looking for, right? So anxiety is basically fight or flight, right? And so the sympathetic is really tapped into this idea of fight or flight. We could probably put this at the top of the list. That's why, for instance, your heart rate increases.
Right.
Right. Good. What else? Either one. What about breathing? What's up? B for both. Okay, what happens over here? Okay, probably increases oxygen levels. Whether that means it probably means you're breathing fast, more rapidly, right? Hyperventilating, closer to that, right? So you're getting more oxygen, right? If you get too anxious and taking too much oxygen, that is a proper hyperventilation. And then over here, right, your breathing is probably slowed. Right, just relaxed. Digestion. This goes where? Yes, sir.
I guess in a state of arousal, you may not acknowledge the fact that, wait, no, this is digestion. I was thinking hunger.
And they're related. They're
Yeah,
go
okay.
together.
Well, I was gonna say that you may not acknowledge that, like, you're hungry. You may not feel very, I don't know.
You're right. You're right on, right? So if you're physiologically aroused, right? If you're worked up, if you're running a marathon, if you're having an anxious day, right? You might not notice that you're hungry. The other thing that happens is your body actually will devote resources away from digestion when you're in this sympathetic state. So when you get worked up, your body will slow down your digestion. You ever see a snake with like a full belly, it's eating a rabbit or a deer or some dog? It's a joke. And then somebody comes upon it or scares it or some other predator comes upon it, and what's the snake gonna do? It's gonna puke, right? Because it can't do both. I mean, obviously the snake requires a lot more resources to digest. You don't necessarily have to sit in a stable place for a day or two, but right, it does slow us down. You eat a big meal, you kind of slow down, right? Because your body is switching to this mode where your digestion is increasing. And so it doesn't want to do both, right? That's why sometimes if you've just eaten, and we do this too, then you go outside and you run around, puke. Same thing. We don't usually, but it feels like it. And if you kept going, you might. Some conditioning will get you there. So sweating, of course, is going to be over here. And then we talked about these. These don't have a one-to-one fit, but I do think there's probably some relationship, right? Your pain tolerance probably goes up here. Probably just not paying as much attention to pain, and then here it may will go down. You're relaxed, you're sitting on the couch and something bites you, you're probably more likely to feel that than if you're outside biking, you might not notice it as much. So what about sexual arousal? This is a pretty interesting one. So broadly, again, if this isn't clear, the sympathetic mode is a physiological arousal. Heartbeat, breathing, less digestion. This is you ready to run a race. This is you ready to start a fight. This is you ready to, I don't know, break down in tears, right? This is kind of a physiological arousal. And then here, you're digesting, you're breathing slower, your heart rate slower, right? This is gonna be a more relaxed state of mind and state of body. Which of these do you think promotes sexual arousal? Sympathetic or parasympathetic activity? What's that? Parasympathetic, why?
More relaxed and your eyes like got less adrenaline.
So, you say you're more relaxed,
And like less energy being spent on anything else, so.
and so less energy is being spent on anything else, more energy for sexual arousal, is that what you're saying? It's not bad. Yes, sir?
Would it go along with like the pain tolerance you said? Of like how if your like heart rate goes up and everything, you may not have you may not be able to feel pain as much, but if your heart rate's slower and everything, you may be able to feel it more. Is like correlate the same type of thing?
So you're talking about sort of here just a broad lack of sensitivity. That may well be true. That's not the underlying issue, but yes, that may also well be true, that you're just broadly less sensitive, and I think we could probably find a study that suggests that. Yes, sir?
I would say parasympathetic after the fact, but sympathetic while.
Okay, so afterwards you're relaxed,
Yeah.
during, not so much.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's just certain energies that are spiked.
Sure.
So,
So I like to talk about this because I think it's an interesting, not paradox, but it's a bit counterintuitive. But if you think about it, it's not. When I tell you, you'll go, oh, of course. I mean, imagine trying to get sexually aroused when you're anxious, you're freaking out, right? The lion shows up. Your partner says, this would be a good time. Right? Or you're running a race, or you're full, well, that's probably the opposite. You're starving, right? Your body is not going to get sexually aroused when it's physiologically aroused. These things are actually sort of teeter-totters of one another. When this was explained to me in undergraduate, they said that the kind of a small difference, or a way to think about this is, the sympathetic mode puts energy to your limbs, to your extremities, right? Running, sweating, fighting, right? These types of things. Whereas the parasympathetic pulls things in. And this is also represented in terms of blood flow, for instance, right? So when you're digesting and the parasympathetic is active, you do have more blood flow in your core. That's helping with digestion. That's also going to help with sexual arousal. You will probably notice that it is easier to be sexually aroused when you're relaxed than it is when you're excited, right? Not sexually excited, but just excited. Here's the weird thing. In order to complete sex, that is to say to have an orgasm or a climax, your body has to, in the midst of the process, flip over to this sympathetic mode. Because in order to have a climax, to have an orgasm, your body has to activate this high heart rate, this faster breathing, this sweating, right? And so there's this weird process that sex engages that nothing else really does, where you kind of need to do both, right? You go from this relaxed state into this sympathetic state. When you're here, you're actually still kind of both here. It's a weird thing that happens, and then of course, afterwards, you're probably gonna move back to this fully parasympathetic state. Does this make sense? One person got it. So, sexual arousal, and then I have it written in here, I apologize, I'm just gonna write O for orgasm, because we're running out of room. But that sympathetic state is gonna be best for climax and then here for arousal. This is some interesting stuff to note. I usually talk about it a little bit more when we get to sexuality, but if you think about the different types of drugs that do one or the other of these things, right? Downers, uppers, basically, right? And thinking about the effects that those drugs might also have on not just your broad physiological arousal, but also your sexual arousal. So when we get to sexuality, we'll talk about some of those relationships. I usually get a lot of whiskey dick questions. Any questions now? Good. So I just want to take the last bit of this class. We're not going to get to go too deep today, but I would like to just take the last of the class to begin to orient us to the brain itself. That's not me. So we'll just start here. We're going to spend too long here because we will come back to this. But of course, this is just what the brain looks like from the outside of the brain. The brain is facing in this direction, so that would be his face over here, and then the back of his head is facing the way I am. So you can see there that the brain is made up of these 4 lobes. The frontal lobe, that blue lobe, the parietal, it's going to be up top. Your temporal lobes are, of course, at your temples, and then your occipital lobe is going to be in the back of your head. We will come back to looking at this when we start talking about the cerebral cortex, but just that kind of broad overview of what the brain looks like to start with. And then let's look at let's look at the brain bisected, so still facing that way and then sliced right in half. So what you can see here are the inside of the brain such that we can begin to see some of the different features, some of the different structures here. We're not going to dive right in, but I do want to reorient you to something we started talking about on the first day, which is those 3 areas of the brain. So those 3 areas of the brain, again, make this one smaller. These 3 areas of the brain, again, being the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. And so what's going on, refresher, what's going on in the hindbrain? We would probably consider, again, these areas aren't entirely zoned off, but we would probably consider all of this the hindbrain. What's going on, just from what you remember in that first set of classes, what's going on there? Yes, ma'am?
Basic functions.
Basic functions, very good. What does that mean?
Moving, eating.
Moving, eating. Okay, good. What else?
Yes, sir? I guess kind of going with instinctual.
Very good. So involuntary aspects of maybe movement or body control, these types of things. Very good. So yeah, so all of this stuff that you're talking about is found in this part of the brain, this hindbrain. Again, this is the oldest piece of our brain, and because of that, it's gonna really be responsible for most of the things that are just gonna keep us alive. If we share other aspects of our brain with smaller, less evolved creatures, it will most likely be in this part of the brain. Again, this is the oldest part, and some of these things are just really needed to be alive. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time in the hindbrain, because most of what's going on there, and we will talk about some stuff, but most of what's going on in the hindbrain is really about routing things to other parts of the brain. That is to say, most of these structures, the pons, the medulla, the midbrain, and the thalamus. We will talk some about the thalamus. I didn't circle the thalamus, but we probably would consider, I would at least consider part of the hindbrain. We'll talk about why that's not clear. But all of those different structures I pointed out, pons, midbrain, thalamus, all of those things are really just about taking in signals from the body and telling it where to go in the brain. Or vice versa, taking signals from the brain and telling it where to go in the body. This is because nearly all of the information coming into and going out of the brain is going through the spinal cord. Nearly all of that information is going through the spinal cord and down and through the brainstem and down and through the spinal cord. This is, of course, important because, right, if there's just this one pathway that gets in here, well, it's going to meet those parts of the hindbrain first, and that's going to need to tell it, hey, you need to go see the occipital lobe. This looks like visual information. You need to go see the frontal lobe. This looks like something you're planning. This is an emotional thing. They'll talk to the hypothalamus, right? And so all of this stuff is being routed in through here. One interesting thing about the brain, and I've drawn it correctly. So one interesting thing about the brain, or the spinal cord, the brainstem in particular, is that the whole front of it is sending information into the body, and the whole back of it is sending information from the body into the brain. They're sort of split up in this way, right? The front is sending that outgoing information, and the back is sending incoming information. If you sever, of course, this part of the brain, this part of the brainstem, what's going to happen?
Paralysis.
Paralysis, right? If you can't get information out of the brain into the body, well, you're not going to be able to move those parts or that entirety of your body. Here's something interesting. What happens if you sever this part of the brainstem? You leave that one there. What do you think happens if you lose that part of your brainstem? Yes, sir.
Maybe you just know the same things for the rest of your life. You never learn anything.
Okay, so you're thinking you can't learn anything. That's true. It's going to be deeper than that. Yes, sir.
You can't think at all.
You can't think at all.
I'm just going drastic here. I have no idea.
No, that's good. That's pretty good. You're actually really close. If you call it something else, you'd be right. But yes, you probably can't think at all. This would put you into a coma. What's interesting about this is that it suggests something about the nature of consciousness, which is a psychologist I'm very interested in. It suggests that consciousness is really made up of sensations, of incoming stimuli. Because if we can't get any incoming stimuli, we seem to fall unconscious. Long term, right? Not just asleep, but off. And so this again suggests that consciousness is really just perception. It's really just, are you getting information in? There's some theories of consciousness that play on this, that say, yeah, this seems to be true. Consciousness seems to be perception. So is anything that's perceiving conscious? Okay. What's the smallest thing that is man-made that perceives? Somebody wondered if this was conscious. Turns out it's your thermostat, right? Your thermostat can perceive the temperature and then take some action based on what it perceives. And so there's this kind of deep cut of consciousness theory that says, perhaps if we believe this is what consciousness really is, if this is the definition we're sticking with, probably the lowest, at least man-made thing that is conscious is a thermostat, right? Because it is aware. Talk about your iPhone. Maybe it's gonna take over. Here we go. So again, most of the stuff that's happening here is just about this kind of input and output stuff. And again, the rest of what's going on mainly has to do with routing. Again, the pons, the medulla, the midbrain, and even up and through the thalamus, all of these things are going to be kind of just routing into or out of the brain. So I kind of want to move on to the cerebellum, but I don't want to start that because it's sort of an involved piece. So I'm going to have you guys watch that on video. But just quickly, one of the things that the cerebellum does, I do find it pretty fascinating, is it doesn't tell us to move. We're going to talk about the fact that you telling your body to move is actually happening up in that wrinkly part of your brain. You're kind of commanding yourself to do this with your thought process. But I call it Professor Cerebrum, or Professor Cerebrum, because it just makes orders. It's not going to carry it out. It's just giving you the idea, right? You should go pick that rock up. Somebody do that too. And your cerebellum is the part of your brain, right, way down here, that actually has to put the plan together. That is to say, extend arm, extend fingers, close fingers, grip, lift, right? The cerebellum is the part of your brain that's actually giving that kind of line by line code, if you like. Whereas the wrinkly part, the cerebellum, the cerebrum, they do have similar names. The cerebrum, the wrinkly part of your brain, the top part, is just saying, hey, we should do this. Right? And then it sends that message to the cerebellum, which has to figure out how to carry that out. Questions before I let you go a little early? Okay, so we'll keep talking about this. We'll probably still be talking about it on Tuesday when I see you again. Like I said, the next video we'll start talking more specifically about some of the structures in the brain. We'll start looking at the cerebellum, which is really interesting. I'll start showing some videos in class. I may also link those just on the YouTube playlist, depending on how they show up on video. But one of the cool things about some of this stuff is thinking about what happens, like with the Soma, when these parts of the brain stop working. Turns out that's usually how we learn about it. All right, have a good week. I will see you all on Tuesday.